Boom. Okay. We are live. Guys, so good to see you. I'm going to bring my guest in a second. His name's Ian. Let me just have a very special intro for him. So Ian's a good friend of mine. We met like during an online Christian entrepreneur thing. And on different days after we both presented our business stuff, we DM'd each other being like, hey, thanks for not being like cringe and being like building something that sounds really interesting. So since then we've just like hit it off. That was a couple of years ago. And we've just like been able to chat and hang out, which is great. So Ian is an entrepreneur. He started several companies, built around community and story. And his most recent endeavor is Hero Journey, which is a movement for men to reclaim life, a life of purpose and adventure. So we have chatted, he and I, many times. Cigars, Chesterton, life, politics, everything. Let me bring him in. Ian, there we go. We have done it.
What's up, buddy?
Dude, I'm so glad to get to do this. This is going to be a blast.
Thanks for having me on, buddy. I'm excited to chat with you.
Yeah, dude. Also, I love the new studio.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, so I spent all of 2022 into 2023 in a dark room upstairs, like literally right above where I am right now. And I traveled for Christmas. I came back home January 1st. I was like, I can't go back to this dark soulless room. Let me out of here. So I turned my garage into a little studio, and I feel like my testosterone went up like 300 points that day.
Yeah, dude, that's the way to do it. Right now, because our little guy is like transition, like he was in a crib beside our bed, and so he's moved into my office, and so like I just keep getting shifted around the house, around our apartment, and so like every time I'm deep in the work, I'm like having a bit of tea and I'm reading and drawing, I'll be like, oh, time for Ransom to have a nap, and so like I got to go set the room all up for him. So I cannot wait to have a real studio, but we'll get there. But like you said, Kay, talking about testosterone. So one of the things I want to chat with you about, there are...
It's a great way to start it off, talking about testosterone.
Well, there are like lots of major issues. There's lots of major cultural conversations around men and masculinity in particular. And there are talking heads and pundits who have lots to say. Twitter is like an over-the-top space where like you have polarized views. And then the church world is like some weird... like copycat of a cultural conversation, just not as deep, right? So we're having a superficial conversation or a superficial mimicry. And so one of the things that I want to chat with you about is masculinity in general. So and then like we'll get down into some deep stuff. So right off the bat, how would you talk about masculinity, define it? What would you say it is?
I mean, that's such a broad question. Yeah,
totally.
What is masculinity? It's like, it's being a man. It's everything that surrounds being a man, right? And there's I understand the cultures on the movement of the culture over the last several decades, which is trying to make room for the people that are in the margins that don't fit into the stereotypical formulas to have a place at the table and still be considered a man, still be considered, respectable, still be considered valuable. I also understand that there's places inside of these stereotypes themselves that are pretty unhealthy. Mm-hmm. But I think this is the case with everything in our culture right now. We get on a righteous cause and we don't know when to stop. And then any type of pursuit without God at the front or at the top of that hierarchy ends with the destruction of whatever that virtue or that value is that you have. And I know we're going to talk about Chesterton, but that's something that he's on about a lot. But anything that is your like absolute or your pursuit without any type of like unifying framework is going to end up destroying that thing. And so, at the expense of masculinity, we've pursued an inclusive conversation about it. Totally. And I don't think that it needs to be at the expense of masculinity. I think masculinity is something that encompasses all of human existence, but it encompasses that in a healthy way for half of the population, right?
Yeah.
And so like you want to be the four masculine archetypes. You've got the king, warrior, magician, lover. That's all of human existence. That's reason and order and structure. And you've got warrior, which is like strength and discipline and courage and living by a code. And then you've got the magician, which is like trying to figure out attain knowledge and figure out what's happening in the world, what's happening in the lives of the people around you, and then help shape things, help navigate things, help like bring about what can be. And then there's the lover, which is like the part that Western civilization, stereotypical like macho man, has completely cut out, right? Which is like enjoy life, seek beauty, seek pleasure, see the people around you, slow down, like just watch a chick flick with your wife, slow dance. I posted a reel one time about like slow dancing with your wife or whatever, and there's so many dudes that were like gay.
Yeah, I would
like
never
we don't do
this.
that. And you're like, dude, like that's some of the good stuff of life. And masculinity should include all of those things if it is a full and healthy masculinity. So
dude, that's so good.
That's like a 30,000 foot view of it.
Yeah. And I think, okay, so those are some things that I do want to drill down into. So I do agree with you. I think one of the ways that our culture has talked about masculinity has been from the bottom up rather than the top down. So we've, like you said,
Sure.
we've taken all of these different archetypes and these different versions or expressions of masculinity and said, well, since these are disparate, we can't really have a cohesive definition or ideal of masculinity that sits at the top from the other way. The only reason I'm talking this way is I just finished reading a big dissertation about Lewis and his view on masculinity and femininity and hierarchy. And okay, so I do want to chat about some of those things. So we talk about masculinity. The definition you gave is, I think, the only real definition that works, which is like just being a man. And then being a man needs definitions. When we can chat about that in a second. But when it comes to all these these archetypes and expressions, I think that this is like one of the things that makes the chat around masculinity super difficult for people, because people exist on this, it will be a spectrum of expressing these archetypes. So like if you take a pure lover and a pure king, they look at life completely different. So why don't we chat a little bit about some of these different archetypal expressions and then how that plugs back into being a man? Because I think that's one of the pain points that a lot of people feel, which is like, so a lot of men and then a lot of women who look at the men around them, the pain points they would feel is like, okay, so for me, I love beauty, I love pleasure, I love the adventure of life. I'm an artist, I'm a writer, whatever. And then I also love figuring this stupid, crazy world out. I know how to plug that back into an idea of masculinity, but because the broader culture has totally defamed masculinity, I feel like, and I know tons of guys who can't make that step, who don't know how to plug in, who don't know their identity, and who don't know how to express that identity confidently in a masculine way.
Right. Okay. So first of all, I definitely think that the culture has a massive impact on how we view masculinity, how we view ourselves. And like, there's a lot of really bad ideas and frameworks and understandings that need to be dismantled. And yeah, I agree with all of that. I also think that that's just part of being a person. Like in a fallen world, being a person, we don't know who we are. We're seeking our identity. We're seeking our like validation. And we're like, that's just part of being a person. And I don't, probably in some settings, it's easier to figure out some of those foundations because those foundations haven't been chipped away. But at the same time, like, this is where we are right now. So I'm trying to focus less on like the cultural movements that are impacting us. Like there's a lot of value and validity in trying to like understand and critique the cultural movements. The stuff that I'm really more interested in is like the individual application, like for your life, what does it look like for you to find identity? What does it look like for you to find, validation in the right places, for you to seek your foundation? And so those are the conversations like that's kind of where I go with masculinity, right? It's like, okay, who am I? Well, part of that is indeterminate because I have to go negotiate my identity as I go proceed into the adventure of my life. But also there is like I'm not the same as you. Like there's things about my personality that are different, wired differently than yours. And, you know, you and I message a lot, like we're so similar, but so different. There's so many ways that we overlap, but then there's these there's these wild gaps where we're like, well, we're not the same at all. And that's what makes us interesting. Like, I don't want to have a world populated with people that are exactly like me. Mm-hmm. So figuring out who you are is both the discovery of like some stuff that's ingrained in you, and it's also the adventure of your life. It's a negotiation that comes through the action and the adventure of your life. You know, like whoever you marry is going to have a massive impact on the person that you become. The jobs that you take, the roles that you take, the labels that labels that you have to. Our world is a very label forward world. So all of those things shape you, and that's not a bad thing. You know, there's a lot of talk about like there's this kind of view in postmodern philosophy that's like we're a blank slate, right? We're like don't let the world impact your beautiful little star, who you are. Just like bring your identity to bear on the world. And there is a truth in that, because I do, like, as a Christian, I do think that God made me with a specific set of things that are default towards me. Mm-hmm. Same with you, and different from anybody else. But I don't think that those things are 100% of my identity. And I also don't think that those things are guaranteed to me. So one of the ideas that's like really helpful to me is like a seed and a plant, or like think about it like an acorn and a tree, right? So everything that can come from that acorn, everything that can be that tree is already in that acorn, right? The DNA, the identity of that tree is already, it's all potential. It's wrapped up as potential in that acorn, but it's not necessarily guaranteed that it's going to be a healthy, strong tree unless it has good soil, unless it has good sunshine, unless it has good water. If it's crowded out with bad soil, with no water, it's not going to be a healthy tree. Mm-hmm. And so in the parallels to our identity and to our lives is really, really strong there. I'm going to stop because that's a rant that we
No, I love that. I love that. And I think that's really important to rant on. So one of the things that you said, which is amazing, that a lot of people, I feel like I didn't hear this explicitly, but I experienced it as I tried to figure out who I was that negotiation, was that cultivation of who I am as a man. So I had these ideas, like there's these things that were building up inside of me as I was growing up, and I'm sure it's similar for you. I had my identity and my giftings and personality and way of being in the world. I had my family, and then I had my ideals. I had these heroes I looked up to. I had these people, this idea of a person I wanted to be, and I would go out into the world and I would realize that it would act upon me and I would act upon it. And what came out in that interaction was who I really was. And there were some things that were amazing. And then there was some stuff that was the worst things you can imagine. And then I had to look at myself and be like, okay, so is that the kind of man I am? So let's talk a little bit more about that cultivation, because I guess there's I'm picturing two guys in my head, like real people who have messaged me and who I've had drinks and chats with. And one of the things that one of them is going through is like, okay, one of them is the confidence to not just have the world act upon you, but like assert yourself upon the world. And when something pops up, to not be crushed by the insecurity of like, dang, I was actually a bad person. The other way is this one person who all they do is assert themselves upon the world with the only way I know how to do it is because of how I envision life, was like with no romance, with no give and take, with no like, hey, if I want to have a healthy relationship with the world around me, I got to give and I have to receive. So like, how would you chat to those two different types of men?
Well, okay. So the first thing is we always want to have an answer. We always want to have a definitive answer. And it's like, it almost always comes down to a binary. And, every once in a while you can find somebody that's like, I don't want to be liberal or conservative. I want anarchy. And you're like, okay, cool. Like, Cool. You found a third option. Great. So this is something that I've got from Chesterton, right? So like in Orthodoxy, he talks about how the key to Christian ethics everywhere is finding a healthy synthesis of two seemingly opposing forces. And he doesn't paint this image, but the way that it makes sense to me is like binaries are on a line, right? So you've got like competing things. And so the normal human ethic is to say, okay, we don't want to be like fully to this side and we don't want to be fully to that side. So we're going to compromise. We're going to go cut it right down the middle. And we're not going to be like fully proud, but we're also not going to be fully groveling, right? That's the example that Chesterton uses. The image that makes sense to me is like this pyramid where like at the top, both of those things in full force collide, and they're both fully present and fully redeemed and fully integrated.
That's huge.
So,
just before you go on, I think that's an enormous thing to say, because I have had so many conversations with people and myself being like, hey, a middling route is both things poorly. You're not
both
humble.
things poorly.
Yeah, you're not.
Yes.
You're not proud. You're not like in the good sense of pride. You're not actually humble. You're this weird, horrible, warm rag that like grows, that just festers. When in reality, what you want is to break it all. You almost break down the binary and you say, I'm going to build both virtues at the same time. And I'm going to trust that they intersect because of Christ, intersect in the person of Christ.
Right.
And I'm going to try to embody that. And I think that is phenomenal. Like if I was a dude and I didn't know this and I was taking notes, what you just said would be the thing I wrote down, which is like, hey, don't do two things poorly. Do them both excellently to the extreme, and just trust that they, like when Chesterton talks about those paradoxes, he trusts that they level each other out. Right? Yeah.
Okay, so back to there's a lot of way, like I'm sure some people are listening to this and they're like, that sounds cool, but I don't know what that means like in practice, right? And there's a lot of conversations that we could have around that. But in the context of the question that you asked, the reason that I brought that up is because this is actually a question that I've wrestled with a lot over the past 2 years. And you'll know this because you were a part of the first round of Hero Journey. Chapter 2 is about identity. And I didn't know what to do with identity. I knew that it was foundational. I knew that chapter 1 had to be about this, like the mindset and the lifestyle of accepting the call to adventure, understanding that you have the invitation given to you that is this adventurous life that has purpose, that's about more than just you, that ties into this unfolding narrative across time. And you have the invitation to either like answer that call and have that type of adventure with your life, or you can just react and, sit back and your life can be pretty mediocre. And so that's obvious. Okay. Obviously that has to be chapter 1. The next thing has to be identity. Like it has to be identity, because identity informs everything else. And I've heard so much bad theology and philosophy about identity that I didn't realize how much I had a lack of an understanding of what identity actually was about until I started writing that chapter. And I was like, I don't actually know what I think about this. Like on one hand, I do think that you go out and you like forge your identity on the adventure. But on another hand, I came up in a church culture that's like, God's given you a special identity. He's like, you're my little dude.
What's the VeggieTales thing? Like, God,
you're my little warrior. Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's like, I have a name that's unique for you, that's different from my name for Josh. And so part of that struggle, and that was my least favorite part of the first iteration of Hero Journey, was like what ended up being chapter 2. And it's now the thing that I'm most excited about for Hero Journey, because I've wrestled with this over the past 2 years a lot. So anyways, that was a long-winded way to come back to your question. The reason that I brought up the paradoxes is because I was caught up in that binary of like, is it something that you figure out on the road, or is it something that's intrinsic in you? And it obviously has to be both. There obviously are things about you that are unique to you. There obviously are things about you that are discovered on the road that are unique to your marriage and your job and the relationships that you have, the responsibilities that you have. And that is the adventure of your life, is figuring out what the intersection of those 2 points are, but not just for the sake of like discovering yourself and finding your truth. But the point of that is like, that is on the road towards some mission that is beyond you. If it's about you, you can follow your identity down into an eternal spiral down into hell, right? And I think that that's what our culture is doing right now, where it's like, what is my identity? What's my truth? It's whatever I feel right now. Okay, five months later, oh, it's actually something different. And it's always about you. It's not about some type of calling or mission. And so that identity piece, the kind of forward pull of that intersection is the mission, the calling that God has placed on your life, or that you are like co-discovering, that you're trying to figure out, what am I here for? The things that are unique about me, my personality, am I introvert, am I extrovert? Do I love taking risks? Is that stuff really stressful to me? Do I love exploring new ideas, or do I just kind of like maintaining things like just the comfortable thing? Those are all unique things about you that if you live at odds with those, you will have a lot of stress and anxiety in your life. At the same time, if you just are complacent and give yourself excuses for certain things, you're also not going to have the adventure. So like that's held in attention. But so there's like personality stuff, there's value stuff. Like there's going to be things that light you up that don't light me up. There's going to be things that I really value, that if I live at odds with those values, my life is going to feel there's going to be a lot of dissonance in my life. Right. And it like the list kind of goes on. There's several things in your life that you can kind of take stock of. It's like personality, values, it's the relationships and the responsibilities that I have. It's the skills that I have. Like there's things that I'm great at. There's things that are really tough for me. And then there's also like the stuff that I enjoy, right? You send me a lot of like reels and memes that I'm like on the same level as you. And then sometimes you'll send me stuff and I'm like, that wasn't for me, like that's fine. And I think that that's part of the indication system for like what I'm supposed to be on about. Yeah. And so all of this stuff these are landmarks in the fog for you to be able to see and navigate, like take your bearings, navigate based on those principles. And then you can kind of figure out where you're supposed to be aiming, and and you will discover, I mean, that is the adventure of your life, and you'll discover who you are along the way. And I think, the last thing I'll say about that is like, there's things about me that will be pretty freaking constant. And there's also things about me that I look back on 10 years ago and I'm just like, dude, I'm not even the same person.
Yes.
And it's like, well, identity is obviously something that is, it evolves. So
totally. I think all of that is so important. And so I think just for people who are listening in to like reflect on, one of the things in determining who you are as a man is going to be that introspection, this internal assessment of who you are from a personality perspective, who you are from a gifting perspective, who you are from a value perspective. And then as you act those things out, like,
and don't forget the joy, because like,
yes.
Dude, if we forget the joy, it's like, we're so dehumanized in our culture. It's all about like being a robot and having a function. Like we have to put the joy back into it, especially for those church bros. It's like all about the duty. I got to go do something meaningful. It's like, great, do something meaningful, but like do something that like lights you up too.
Yeah, actually I have a couple questions around that for you down the road, because that is a big and major skill of yours, in the sense of a decision with very clear pros and cons, like pros that outweigh the cons. But one of the things that I wanted to say was, like, when you were talking about how one of the issues of our modern culture is to make the self the center of everything. The difficulty with a view like that, this isn't to like, I don't ever want to downplay the self. I think that God made people very special, very unique. That's the VeggieTales thing. You're very special and God loves you, whatever. But I think that we don't have the strength to bear the infinite weight of being the center of the universe. And so when each of us tries to put ourselves,
we're also not interesting enough.
Yeah, like, totally.
I'm a pretty limited dude. Yeah.
Right, like
I don't want to be the center of the universe.
I don't have enough to. I have some friends who we chat about, like, oh, they're like, Josh, you should get a Twitter. You should do this. I was like, listen, first off, you don't want to hear all my opinions about everything. Second off, I'm actually not just that fun all the time. Like the way I can have a conversation like this with you when we hang out, it's the best. is because I take time and I sit and I read books and I write and I process. So I have an
Sure.
idea to bring to the world, right? So like this idea of like us being the center, being some like bright little light that everyone wants to gather around is actually like that is the true dehumanization, because if you do that, you then have to betray every aspect of yourself that is living and is alive and needs love to the other, but in a corrupt way, if that makes sense. Like you have to remove yourself for the sake of every other person. But in Christianity, if God remains the center and we derive our identity, our primary identity from him as humans and then as people, we then get to take that and go forward. And I think one of the things that you drew out was saying all of these things, the joy, we'll start off with that one, the joy, the personality, the giftings, the values, these give you an aim and a direction. And so before we start chatting about hero journey, one of the things I want to touch on, a bunch of people messaged me to ask you about this, was culture's idea of toxic masculinity.
Yeah.
So we have these archetypes. We have this,
Yep.
say, a person who's like, this is my value, this is my personality, this is my gifting, this is my joy, this is my aim. Culture's telling me being a man is toxic, or some people are saying that. And then people are saying like, what aspects of my masculinity? So whatever you have to say to address toxic masculinity, you can define it if you want, and then we can work through it.
Okay, so the first thing I'll say is any type of conversation about anything is basically trying to create abstract ideas about things that are out in the like experiential world. So we're trying to like put language to stuff. We're trying to we're trying to build frameworks to understand something that is essentially not really understandable, right? I mean, this is like getting a little esoteric, but one of the frameworks that's been really helpful for me to understand masculinity is the 4 masculine archetypes. It's not perfect, but it's pretty dang close to it. Like it's really, really helpful. So it's the easiest way to answer this question is to say, if you don't know about the 4 masculine archetypes, essentially what it is there's these 4 main movements in the soul of every man, and it's the same thing for the women. They just show up differently, and it's the warrior, king, magician, lover. Essentially I ran through this already, but the king is essentially the part of ourself that is rational and orderly, and the role of the king is to provide a habitable order that is good. That's actually Peterson's line. It's the habitable order that is good, right? It's like the idea that I can use my energy to create an order that allows things to flourish. And Chesterton's my probably favorite line from Chesterton is that that orthodoxy is like the structures of orthodoxy are set up so that good things can run wild. That is the king, right? Like creating structures so that good things can run wild. My kids know what's in bounds. They know what's out of bounds. They're not constantly looking over their shoulder, seeing if I'm going to throw a shoe at them. Like they know they can boldly go and do things, knowing what's in bounds and what's out of bounds, and their needs are met and all that stuff. So that's the king. So each of the archetypes has a healthy function and unhealthy function. So if I'm not living into the health of the king archetype, there's a shadow side of that archetype which has 2 poles. There's an active pole and a shadow pole. And it's essentially, and this makes a lot of sense, right? It's like, how can that go badly? It can either go badly by me being actively wrong, like warping that, or I'm not showing up well enough in those ways. So for the king archetype, you can either be a tyrant on the shadow side or a weakling, right? And so the weakling is like, I'm not doing my job. I'm not showing up. So, I'm sure people in your life who are like just like weak, and it's not that they couldn't have the strength. It's that they haven't taken the steps that are necessary to shoulder the responsibility in their life in a way that will positively impact not only their own soul and their own experience, but also the people around them. Mm-hmm. It's the dad who drinks beer and sits on the couch and watches football, doesn't know his kids' birthday dates, is not showing up in a way that is helping his family flourish, is allowing his wife to make all the decisions. Not to say that women making decisions is a bad thing. holy smokes, like women are half of the species. We need women fully activated in the home. But if you're a man and if you're just like completely like withdrawn, that's not good, right?
Yeah.
You've got to get in the game. On the active side, you've got a tyrant, and that's basically like all of the order and like strength and goodness of the king warped into a selfish, needy, controlling form. So it's like it's all of the tyrants that you can possibly imagine, from a bad dad to like, you know, Stalin and Hitler, right? It's like all of that. So yeah. So anyway, and you know, we could draw some more contemporary examples, but we'll leave it there. So I will say this is a very long-winded way of saying, when we talk about toxic masculinity, essentially what we're talking about is the active, unhealthy form of each of those four masculine archetypes. So you've got tyrannical patriarchy. It's the macho man that wants to control everybody and assert his dominance. You've got the masochist on the warrior front, who is going to be, you know, highly risk-taking, who's going to be overly combative, who's going to be physically abusive, all that stuff. You've got the addicted lover. So you've got a playboy who's going to go out, like all of these bros that are like pickup artists online.
And like, well, in our day and age too, they're just porn heads.
Yeah. But it's also, that's part of it. But like, that's as bad as that is, get that into an actual human relationship and a lot of unhealthy stuff comes up, right? Yes. Because it's terrible for you and your soul in isolation in your mom's basement, but it's way worse inside of a relationship because you're damaging. Yeah, it's way worse.
Because that's worse thing. That pornographic addiction is an expression of an unhealthy soul, and when you add other people to the mix, that's like nitroglycerin, man. You're just
there's no bottom to how much you will consume the other person. Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah, you'll suck them dry. And then just to finish that off, the magician is the trickster, the manipulator, and you're basically, this is like the emotional manipulation in a relationship where you're always gaslighting, you're always figuring out how to use ideas or words or reality to warp it to get what you want, right? Mm-hmm. So anyways, that when we talk about toxic masculinity, all we're talking about is unhealthy dudes. And we typically are talking about the active form of those unhealthy dudes. Mm-hmm. And this is where I see, you know, validly, a lot of people are talking about, well, what does toxic femininity look like? Well, there's all kinds of conversations that we can have around that as well. I think really what we should be doing is stop trying to look at the macro movements so much. Not that they're not important, but look at our own little world, look at our own self and figure out, like, what am I doing that how could I be carrying my soul through this life better? Like, how could I be stewarding my life better? How could I be taking on more responsibility? How could I be stepping into the adventures instead of running away from them? How could I be using the adventures? How could I be pursuing adventures that are meaningful and fruitful and productive for people around me and the world around me, rather than just for my own benefit?
Totally. Rather than just greedy consumption. And so I think that's a great way to conceptualize the toxic masculinity, because if you work again from the top down and you have this definition, a broad definition of masculinity, which is just like being a man, then toxic masculinity by that mega broad framework is just not being a man. And so it's not being a good man, it's being a bad man, right? It's literally, so we don't want to say the words good and bad anymore. Totally.
Why? Because we live in this postmodern world in which judgment is like anathema. It's terrible. Like, everybody is equal. All lifestyles are equal. All life choices are equal. It's not true. Obviously not true. There are things that you can do with your life. Look around any major city. There are things that you can do with your life that do not lead to your flourishing and that do not lead to beauty or truth or goodness for anybody that exists in any sphere around you, right?
Totally.
There are things that you can do with your life and with your character and with the choices that you have that will set up not only you for to not only allow you to be able to experience goodness and truth and beauty, but will be a blessing to the people around you.
It's huge.
That's just the reality. Okay. So there are ways to be a good man. There are ways to be a bad man.
Yeah.
And if you are unsure what toxic masculinity is, it's just being a bad man. And there are what I would say to you is, if you're focused on trying to understand what the definition of toxic masculinity is, I would focus on trying to find what is the answer to what is healthy masculinity.
Yeah.
What does a healthy, holistic masculinity look like? Not just in its fully integrated form, but on its trajectory towards something that is meaningful and redemptive.
I think that's huge. There's one of the things that I think is so powerful about that is, what's the best way of saying it? Is so virtue is a huge thing, obviously. And we don't like to talk about virtue because whatever, we're lost in the weeds. But I think one of the issues that a lot of people bump into in church world is they have a sin to kill and get rid of, and they don't have a virtue or a good to aim towards. And so
Right.
I think that there's two prongs to that. So like you'll hear people who'd be like, oh, we have to get rid of toxic masculinity. Everybody agrees. People will be like, well, what do you mean by that? And that's just like rhetoric in the public domain, right? That's like pundits.
Well, okay.
fighting.
So I don't want to like steamroll you, but so the answer to curing toxic masculinity can't be moving you from the active shadow form to the passive shadow form, and
100%.
that's what our culture has done. We're so afraid of being and this goes back to the binary discussion that we talked about towards the beginning. It's not the answer to just push them to the full other side. The answer has to be a healthy integration of those things. You have to be able to be strong and be able to take risks and live by a code, and also do it in a way that is like that you're not going to steamroll other people, right? That is like sacrificial, that is selfless. That's what a good warrior is. You can't say that all of these things that we don't like, we just have to kill them. No, it's like these are just warped drives that actually have a redeemed destination. They have a redeemed bent, and we just have to figure out what that is and point it back there. The problem is, for our culture, that redeemed destination is God, right? And we don't, like, we've dethroned God, and so we have all of these virtues and vices that are running wild. I feel like I have to reference Chesterton, one, because he's the best, and two, because we like promised that we would talk about him. But this is one of my other favorite quotes from him, which is, in our current world, the Christian virtues are running wild, and they do more damage than the vices, and that's a great example of it.
Yeah. No, because everything then is vying for the place of God. And so like if you have a virtue bastardized and removed from its source, so say you have ambition, which is a good virtue, and that's removed from everything else, and that takes the throne, then ambition by itself is brutal if it's not tempered by grace and mercy and kindness.
And this makes, I would say, the most compelling argument for this in our culture is that we have made compassion our highest virtue, and you can watch in real time as truth and justice and free speech and all these other, like, the right to be your own sovereign individual is undermined at the altar of compassion. And so this is why I think this is maybe the most compelling non-religious reason for believing in God, because God is, and this is something that Peterson talks about, God is essentially the intersection that unites all of those virtues in their proper hierarchy. Totally. So you have justice and you have compassion. So you can't just, like, compassion and justice have to be held in tension. It's that same idea that Chesterton talks about the paradoxes of the faith.
Totally. I mean, that's the cross too. Like, the cross is all of those, literally the intersection of all those things.
Literally the intersection, yeah.
And so, like, it is so powerful, because I think one of the things, like, for men to aim towards and then to develop and cultivate a life of virtue, I mean, this is an area where the church is, like, kind of missing, at least, like, most of the places that people I know are going to church. There are different, like, traditional historic churches that do have a life of virtue inbuilt into their liturgical calendar and how they talk and conceptualize of the world. But, like, broadly speaking, evangelicalism is completely removed. And so this is one of the questions I want to talk about when we were talking about, like, how is the church doing around masculinity? And these questions is, I think you already hit it because Chesterton's just the best, is we've replaced the core virtues and the quote unquote theological virtues with other virtues. And so you can go from church to church, and the quote unquote ideal man is completely different. And if you stray from that tiny box, you experience some sort of pushback, right? Either like you're out of the community altogether, or you get beaten into place, or you have to be like, hey, I'm going to fight you every single Sunday.
Or it's
for the
like
rest of my life.
self-censoring. Self-censoring is a huge part of it, where you're like, you just feel like I have to reflect whoever's up on stage if I want to be cool or holy or, manly or whatever it is. Yeah.
Totally. And so I would say that for men who are going through this, the thing that Ian brought up, and this will lead us into hero journey, which is very important that I do want to talk about, is when you look at the broad macro picture, you can't wait for you do have the top. You have the top of the heap, God. Everything else is not rightly ordered in our modern society, and it never will be until the end of all things. But you, each individual, we all become a person who can help rightly order something by first rightly ordering ourselves. So let's talk about hero journey, because I know this has been a thing that you've been developing for a long time. I got to go through the first bit. So the first thing is...
Well, hey, before we do that, I just want to say one thing about this to kind of put a bow on it. There's a idea in like Lewis and Chesterton are both like the king of metaphors. And Lewis has a metaphor about how God created the human machine and he created us to run on him. Mm-hmm. And he can't give us happiness or fulfillment apart from him, because we're not designed that way. Like it doesn't work. Right. And I think that this is the point that I'm trying to make. And it's the same point that I see a lot of people trying to make online right now, is that we can't have that we cannot pursue virtues on their own and hope to find virtue. Christ says, seek first the kingdom of heaven and all these things will be added to you. That applies for everything in life. If you want true virtue, you can't go seeking compassion. Like you can't go seeking justice. If you go seek justice, you will kill compassion. If you seek compassion, you will kill justice. And this goes all the way down the line. If you seek God, you will have all of those things, and you're not going to be perfect. We're human, we're flawed. We're not going to perfectly execute this every time. But we at least have we're running on the right stuff. We have a clear destination and a clear vision and an intuition for how all of those things can be married together in the proper trajectory. Because again, it's not just about halfway on this binary. It's about a destination, and that destination is the kingdom of God.
Yeah, that's actually super important. Like when Lewis talks about like loving first things first, means I can love second things best, it's enormous. And like we think that if we spend all this time orienting our life towards God and holiness and my conception of it, like the adventure of becoming a saint, we think we lose everything. And Lewis's answer to that and Jesus's answer to that is like, unless a seed falls into the ground, it dies, it has no life. But if it does, then what happens is you reap a harvest of 100-fold. And so our lives are like that. I was listening to this Orthodox guy talk about this the other day, and he's like, here's something people don't talk about masculinity in our modern time: silence and prayer. When's the last time you heard someone just say, like, you want to go be a man? Go be silent in prayer. And
anybody that follows John Mark Comer.
Yeah, that is true. Okay, dude, so talk to us about Hero Journey. First off, the name. Everyone has questions about the name. Tell us, like,
I feel like it's the most controversial thing about everything that I'm doing is like the name feels like a massive barrier for people, because especially people that are coming from the church, we have in the West so separated humanity from the story of God and man, right? So the story of God and man is the story of God and man. It's not just the story of God. God made man, and that was the beginning of the story that we are a part of. Obviously, God is supreme, and what he's doing is, like, he is the author of this story, but he created free will in a way that, like, has invited us in to be co-authors with him, right? And so there's going to be this is going to get us into some theological water, but so both of us came up in kind of a Calvinistic, Reformed, somewhat fundamentalist world, and I have thankfully moved on from there to a place of an understanding that feels like my humanity has come back into the story, where the story that I grew up with felt like it was about God, and I was somewhat of a non-entity in my own life. It was like God who works in and through me, and I just have to like let it happen. And I think that you can absolutely find verses that seem to say that. But if you look at the story of the Bible as a whole, that's not at all what it's saying. It's the story of the Bible is an adventure story. It's the story of God inviting his people to find a way back to him. We can't do it on our own. So it's like a rescue mission that he, has to go on into, but then we still have a role to play in that. Right. And so there's a commission at the beginning of the Bible, which is to rule over the world, to subdue it, to multiply, blah, blah, blah. Then there's a commission in the middle of the Bible where Christ says, okay, so no, go out and like make the kingdom of heaven come here, like go out and spread this around. Right. And so at the center of the story of the Bible is a commission, is an invitation into an adventure. Mm-hmm. And so the name Hero Journey, essentially it's a riff off of the archetypical structure of the hero's journey framework. So it's a super original name. But the idea of the hero's journey is every single story that we've ever told that's like a great story that means something that lasts the test of time is about a hero who is called to an adventure, who oftentimes will refuse that call because they're like afraid, or they're like, who am I to go on this call? It's Moses at the burning bush, like, who am I?
Totally.
And so they usually refuse that call.
I got a stutter,
God. I don't talk real good.
Yeah, that's like, that's one of the best excuses.
Yeah. Who, me? Yeah. So the hero receives a call, refuses the call, and usually they meet a mentor or a guide who helps initiate them into this adventure, right? So you could be thinking about Obi-Wan Kenobi inviting Luke. You could be thinking about Hagrid inviting Harry. Like you could be thinking about Gandalf inviting Frodo. Whatever your story framework, like whatever that story is that you love, lock that into your mind right now as I go through
Mr. Miyagi inviting Daniel's son.
Yeah, Daniel's son. Yeah.
Yeah, man, you gotta go cry.
So they meet a guide who helps them enter into a special world, right? So they leave their ordinary world behind. And that's, you leave behind the comfortable, the familiar, the things that are going to keep you in the same place forever. And you step out into the adventure. And the adventure is where you face challenges and obstacles, and you grow and you evolve, and things are different, and it stretches you, and you're not ready for it, and you fail and you fail and you fail, and you keep getting stronger and learning as you go up. And along that journey, you have to confront things inside of you that are holding you back, that are, that are lies that you've believed. They're unhelpful patterns that you've allowed yourself to fall into. They're family of origin narratives or wounds that have held you captive. There's a death of those parts of you, and there's a rebirth into a new, healthier, fuller integrated, more fully integrated, more wise, stronger version of you. And, on the archetypical journey, you confront the dragon. So there's like an internal confrontation, which we represent with the shadow. And then there's an external representation, which is the dragon. Because we're not just internal beings, we also exist in a reality, in a world that has a reality beyond us. So you have to confront both the internal and the external, and through that confrontation, that is the test of essentially the journey that you've been on. And if you're able to defeat the dragon, and successfully navigate your own internal stuff, you get the gold. But the point of the story isn't getting the gold. And this is what our culture gets wrong. It's not about the gold, and it's not about you. It is about you in a very fundamental sense that, like, I'm the only person that can live my life, that can go on the adventure of my life. And if I don't do it, my life is going to not only be really unfulfilling to me, but it's also I'm missing on the opportunity to be a blessing and a force of redemption for the people around me. I'm missing on the opportunity to be a really freaking good dad for my kids, to be a really good wife or husband to my wife, Hannah. Like, Hannah deserves to have the best husband in the world. And if I'm not on the adventure of my life, I will not be that man. I have to be on the adventure of my life in order to be that man for her, to be that dad for my kids. So you get the gold, and then in the hero's journey framework, you go back, with the gold, you go back to your ordinary world to be a force of blessing for those that haven't yet gone on their adventure.
Yeah.
And that is the cycle, right? And so that's what we do in Hero Journey. We lead guys through a 12-month program that takes them step by step through that pattern. And the idea here is that the framework of the hero's journey framework is the blueprint for transformation. Whether you're talking about, like, how do I learn how to code? How do I learn how to play the piano? How do I learn how to cook? How do I ask a girl out? How do I start a new business? How do I be a good dad? Like, whatever that thing is that you are stretching towards, the hero's journey framework is the blueprint for that type of transformation that is going to be necessary for you to move from where you are stuck now to where you could be.
Dude, yes. Okay, there's so much there that's worth picking up on and chatting.
That was a huge rant. Yeah.
No, which I love.
10 minutes later.
Hero Journey, like, first off, I love the conception of it because of the story. Like, all of us resonate with stories because we live one and we are one. Like, we ourselves are a story. We exist in our story and then in a broader story. So, and then everything we consume that we love consuming is a kind of story. Movies, films, books, shows, all of it is a story that we fall in love with. And so then to recognize yourself as the character, as the main character of your life, but you have the power to, like, author it and you have the power to change it, is enormous. One of the things that I loved going through as much as I could, because I was having my health stuff, thank God that's done. But one of the things that I loved about it was existing in that community together slowly. Yep. So one of the things that's powerful, like, and I'll just say on this end that's powerful about Hero Journey is not just that it's this mental ascent. It's not just stuff you consume and an idea that you can, like you said, tie a bow around and put in your pocket. And if someone asks you, hey, what does it mean to be a man? You're like, well, you know, I had this call to adventure and then I had to face my internal self and external self. And I learned all of this in a day or two because I binged watched a YouTube series on what it means to be a man. And now I'm a great man. Be like, no. You have it laid out where it's great. You have to work through things slowly in time. You work things through with people. There are questions, there are checkups, there are goals that people think they're shooting towards at the beginning. Halfway through they change, but they're still aiming towards something. And then, like you said, it's this framework for almost every avenue of our lives. And so there's two things I wanted to ask you going forward about Hero Journey. Number one is talk about the community, why you decided to do it as like it's like a kind of exclusive idea of a cohort. It's not like 7,000 people can join. So you have this idea of, like, it has to be tight knit enough.
If 7,000 of your followers want to join, like, we'll do our best.
Yeah. So tell me about, like, the impetus of, like, why community. We'll start there, actually.
I wanted it to actually work, right? Like, I wanted it to actually be something that has impact on your life. And I think we live in a completely disembodied world, like, where our human existence. I just heard Brett Weinstein say this about music. Like, music throughout human history was an experience that you had in a room with people. And it was different every time. You could play the same song 1,000 times and it would be a different song every single time. And it wasn't just consumption. You were actively engaged in it. Like, even if you were sitting on the other side of the room, it was right there and you could experience that. Now we listen to, the same Taylor Swift song 1,000 times. It's the exact same song every single time. We're passive consumers. You and I have connected really strongly about this. The dehumanization and commodification of the human soul and experience in our culture, I think, is like the great sin of our time, and it's getting worse and worse. And so The idea
cough.
of just giving people a bunch of ideas and propositions to agree with or to wrestle with. Don't get me wrong, ideas are powerful. They can be put into practice. Ideas have changed my life in massive ways. But ideas are not the human experience. And it's also, ideas don't, they take putting into practice to actually work.
Mm-hmm.
And not many people will hear an idea and then go put that into practice and like workshop it in their relationships and like bring it to fruition in their lives.
Because they think that having the idea is enough of the work. They think that picking up a book and because reading a book is hard, or listening to a long form conversation can be hard depending on how charismatic the people speaking are. But they think that truth is an end in and of itself, but it's not. You still have goodness and beauty to bring to the world.
Don't get me wrong. Truth are great, but like the idea of propositional reality being our fundamental reality is just whack. Like we are experiential beings. Totally. Yes, we are rational beings. Yes, we need to exist in the propositional world. I live here in Nashville now. There's lots of people who are like stuck in the experiential and they don't exist in the propositional at all. And it's just like, do you want to talk about anything? Like, do you want to think about anything? Or you just want to be
just like off in the ether. Yeah. Being.
Yeah. Yeah. It's just like drinking beers and tailgates and like backyard barbecues. And it's like, don't get me wrong. That's some of the best stuff of life. You also like, I also want to talk about some ideas and like do something. And I want my existence to wrestle with, stuff that matters. Yeah. But anyways, so I'm digressing massively. The idea of cohorts is I want transformation to actually work for you. And the way that works is transformation happens on an adventure. So the fundamental principle of Hero Journey is I don't want it to be ideas. I want it to be a rite of passage. I want to invite you into a year that will change everything for you. We are going to go on an adventure together. We are going to wrestle with some of the most difficult and challenging questions and work that you've ever done internally and externally. You're going to do it with a cohort of guys because they will be the accountability and the support and the encouragement that you need, right? Mm-hmm. And so the community is the best. It ends up being the best part of it every time because I can hear an idea and I can put it into practice and like, great, or I can just think about it. But if I'm in a community where guys are talking about what they're doing with that idea, how they applied it to their relationship with their wife or at their work, or how they took a risk that they wouldn't have taken otherwise, you are spurred on to do that as well. And you're challenged to think about it in new ways. And you're given multiple avenues to figure out how to put this idea or this principle or this proposition into practice in your real life. And that's where the rubber meets the road. Yeah, like you've got to have your guys around you to do that. Yeah.
And what's crazy is like I remember joining, and you meet a bunch of dudes, and you have no clue who they are. You don't even know where they're from. You barely know their names at first.
Right.
And then by the end, you're texting each other on the side. You're chatting about the things you love, and there's a ton of freedom. So one of the things I do want to chat about masculine friendship, and then the goal of Hero Journey, and I want to touch on the idea of the great man as well, like. Not just like a person.
We're just pulling out all the stops on this. Yeah.
Right. I want to go all the way.
Should we do a whole conversation about the great man idea?
We should probably, actually we should save that for a separate time because that's a huge one. Cliffhanger. Yeah. Like little, anyway. So, one of the things about friendship, so in our personal lives, it's sometimes very hard to be vulnerable and open up about the things we're insecure about, afraid about, things that we're weak on, we want to get strong on. And something that was interesting for me about Hero Journey was having a bunch of invested guys, and like even if they're like 50 or 60% invested, that multiplies as they go on. It becomes like 70, 80, 90% because you just get so hooked in. But like that's kind of all you need. I actually find that most of the reason why men struggle to make relationships is because generally people aren't engaged in life or relationships. And so Hero Journey had this unique thing where I was like, here's a dude I don't know at all, and he's talking to me about his marriage and stuff that's gone on, whatever, crying, sharing his story, ways churches burn him, ways this, whatever. And you just kind of sit and you're like, thanks, dude. I'm going to tell you my story too. And everyone just kind of shares their story. I mean, and then like you have to steward it well. And so I kind of want to chat a little bit about masculine friendships, not just in a virtual space, because I do know that people in Hero Journey have connected and remained connected.
Sure.
But let's talk about like ideal male friendships, how to build male friendships. Our current cultures struggle with like male friendship in the sense of like, where two or three are gathered, there must be toxicity or whatever, like, or the erasure of masculine spaces, which is actually a thing that bothers me. So talk about male friendships. Give me some thoughts.
Yeah. Okay. So I always start with like the fundamental principle, which is like, you as a person are not going to be satisfied when you're sitting around doing nothing. You are going to be satisfied when you're on a mission with a purpose that is stretching you, that's growing you. That's where you are going to be happiest, most fulfilled, most alive, and the best version of yourself, right? The problem with male friendships today is that so few of us are on that mission. And we've eradicated a lot of these spaces where we can be on the mission and see other people that are on the mission with us, right? Like, we've moved to a massively digital world. And it's hard to see, it's hard to share life and see people on the mission when you're just like connecting on a Zoom call for 30 minutes, right? So the places that we make friends are the place, like, think about the people that are the best friends in your life. You were doing a thing together in proximity near each other. You were both doing that thing. You both had a goal. It's like sports or school or military or work, whatever those things are. It's like, we're on a mission. I see you over there. You're doing something, like, you're different than me. You have strengths that I don't have. I want to rely on you and lean on that a little bit. Let's enjoy each other. Like, let's kick back. Let's celebrate the times that are good, and let's like lean on each other when things are hard. And when you're failing, I'm going to kick you in the butt, like, let's go. And so I think the people that I know in my life who have no friends almost always have no mission. The people that I know that have lots of friends have a clear mission and are active in it. And so I would say this: if you don't have friends, find a mission, even if it's like, I want to volunteer at the local shelter, or I want to go like, stack chairs at church, whatever the thing is.
Yeah.
Like, I want to go start a new business. You will have friends quicker than you can believe, because we make friends on mission.
And I think that so just to chime in, and then I'll have you keep going, is you mentioned 3 embodied missions to be on. So there is this like fake friendship that I think people build virtually, where they send each other memes or they shoot some random DMs. Like, we have been able to like meet in person, which is amazing, but we also have been able to text and chat and Zoom and call. And then, like you said, the overlap of our lives is significant. So I do want to
bro, if you were just sending me memes, like, and you were some random guy that had cool art and were sending me memes, I would be like, who is this dude?
Who is this guy?
But because I know your heart, because like we've connected on what we're about, what we're after, I have so much affinity for you and like so much tolerance for you doing stuff that like seems weird to me.
Right.
And so much appreciation for the stuff that I feel really aligned with.
Totally.
Like, we share that mission.
And I think that those are huge things. Like, so I do get messages from lots of guys who are like, hey, I'm struggling to find community. And in some ways I get it, right? Like, there's a lot of places and churches say that I, for example, feel I don't fit in with because of my lane and my value system. But when I'm doing work with those people, it's great. You realize how much more you have in common. And it's like you said,
that's a huge part of it. I think another big part of it is like, we need to really lower our standards for like what we can tolerate being around.
Totally.
We've become so uncomfortable with discomfort, right? Like, anything that is odd or like different, we're just like, nah, that guy's not my guy. Like,
like everyone wants to have like the coolest friends all the time. And I tell Aislinn, like, my MO has always been, everywhere I go, I just want the people who are engaged in life and who are like authentic. You could be the worst person in the world, but if you're trying to become better and you don't have any airs about it, I will hang out with you for. But if one of those things is gone, if you're not engaged, I'm not interested.
Dude, there's a dude that comes by once a month, and he he sprayed. So I'm out here outside of Nashville, and I'm a West Coast boy, so I don't like bugs. Like
Oh
bugs
yeah.
really bother me. Also, if I walk outside for 5 minutes, I look like Spot from like You Belong in a Zoo or whatever that book is. I get lit up by mosquitoes. So once a month, I have my property sprayed with flea tick mosquito spray, non-toxic, whatever. The dude that comes by and sprays my property, younger guy working a pretty like entry-level blue-collar job. He's one of my favorite people in my life right now. Like every time he comes by, we hang out in the shop here. I'll pour him a beer. We'll hang out for like an hour and a half. Hopefully his employers are not seeing this. I don't know. I think he's off commission or whatever. But his presence and his perspective on life are just so refreshing. And I think I just think we really, really need to lower our standards about what we're after with friendship. So much of this like consumeristic, like what can you give me? What is the status? Like, how is this going to help my status go up? It's just boring.
It's
just
so boring.
really boring.
It's so
man.
lame, dude. Like, I love a salt of the earth person. Like, when we were living in England, some of our closest friends, dude, it was crazy. We ended up living in a house that was a construction zone. And one of the guys I would chat with over coffee all the time, like, was in prison. His wife got saved at the church we were going to. He would reluctantly go over once in a while. We talk about jail. We talk about fights. We talk about beer. We talk about Jesus. And I was like, dude, you are just like one of the most real people I've ever met. Not in the sense of like authenticity as a cultural value and virtue that replaces all, but he was just alive and engaged. And he didn't care what a person thought about him in the good sense of the term. He wasn't like a jackass that was like, yeah, I don't care what you think about me and just say horrible and offensive things. He was like, listen,
but he was
this
real.
is my life.
Yeah, he was a real person. Not pretentious, not trying to impress. Yeah,
it was the best. And so,
refreshing.
Those two things to talk about male friendship. Number one, doing real, active, embodied things together. Having some sort of overlap of values.
Also systems. A great way to find a spouse if you're a single dude watching this or a single gal watching this. Like, go after something. You'll find someone.
Yeah. Dude, yeah. Just do something.
Stop trying to chase the person. Go do something with your life. You'll meet the right person. Yeah. Same thing with friendship. I mean, it's the same thing with almost anything in life. Like, just go after the stuff. Go on the adventure. The stuff that you need is going to be, you're going to find it along the way. And the stuff that you need to find about yourself that you're afraid that you don't have it yet, you're going to find that along the way too.
Yeah, that's actually a huge thing. Like this idea of that's like putting first things first. So like if you put spouse, if you put clout, if you put prestige, whatever it is that people are living for, becoming a super famous YouTuber, as first, you lose everything else. Like Lewis says that, right? Like if you shoot for like the moon, this isn't the right like cosmological conception, but like if you aim for the stars or the whatever and you miss, you still get the rest of the universe. But if you aim for, I so butchered that.
Well, I mean,
quote.
you just think about like if you walk into a party and you really want people to like you and you're like trying to impress them, they're not going to like you. If you're just there to have a fun time and enjoy them, they're probably going to like you, right? So it's just like everybody understands this, but we fail to live it out because we're so fixated on the things that we want that are in the short term that are the things that will get added to us if we seek first the kingdom of heaven. And when I say the kingdom of heaven, I don't mean that in a super churchy cliche way where it's like, just try to be holy. It's like, what is the kingdom of heaven? The kingdom of heaven is like wholeness and peace and perfection and righteousness. How do you get that? Freaking go out and like try to solve a problem. Right? So like the church that I was at in Portland, the amount of nonprofits that were started from this one church, Refugee Care Collective, Every Child, dude, Portland has so many issues. There were so many nonprofits and endeavors that were started because people were like, this is an issue. We want to bring kingdom of heaven to Portland. Let's go. Let's like go start this thing. And then massive, beautiful things happen. That's not a like cloudy, like feel good thing. It's like, go feed some refugees, like get some clothes for them. That's a brutal mission to do, you know? Anyway, Yeah.
But no, but that's huge. Like Dostoevsky talks about that. He's like, love in dreams is beautiful. It's up on a stage, everyone claps for you, but love in reality is harsh and it's
Messy.
brutal
Yeah.
and it costs
Go
your whole
on
life.
the adventure, and you will find your limits very quickly.
Totally.
And a lot of people find their limits and they turn around and they're like, nah, that wasn't for me. Hey, we tried that little mission as a family. It's not really our jam.
We're going to go back to
our comfort zone. Totally. Yeah. Consume.
Yeah.
But no, dude, like that's not what we want. That's not what we're made for.
Totally. And so there's two things I want to hit on that. Number one is we'll transition to, so let's talk about what the point of Hero Journey and all this self-development is, which you've already alluded to. And then I do want to talk about your decision in this adventure of life to be an optimist, right? So there's not a lot of people that I meet nowadays that have joy and vibrancy and optimism as a virtue. Like we live in a very cynical and like poo on everything time, right? Like something good happens, be like, it's just like, I don't want to make fun of boomers too much, but it's just something good happens and you're like, oh, Merida, it's the all ball and chain. Oh, car breaks down. Same.
Yeah.
Stuff, different pile. But your decision to be like, hey, I want my life to be alive, I want it to be vibrant, and I want to be optimistic. Where did that come from? What made you want to go that direction?
I mean, I could try to come up with a great answer for this, but the honest answer is like, that's just how I'm wired. I'm wired to seek life, to seek meaning, to seek beauty. Like that's just how I've always been. I grew up in San Diego, and I would just as a kid like stand on the beach looking out at the ocean and just like dream about the adventures I would have. Like I was just like, dude, I'm gonna have some epic adventures. I'm gonna it was like very undefined, but I would just stand there with this feeling of like, I have so much inside of me that I can't wait to unearth, and I can't wait to see what this world is all about. Mm-hmm. And seeing the world in any other way has always seemed so foreign to me. And dude, I feel like referencing Chesterton again it's going to feel like enough with the Chesterton stuff, but he's the best. In Orthodoxy, he talks about, there's a chapter, I think it's chapter 5, called The Flag of the World. And he's been talking about the idea of like optimism and pessimism and how both of them seem pretty ludicrous to him. And I think the reason, a little parentheses here, the reason I love Chesterton so much is because he so clearly articulates the things that I felt my whole life and have never been able to articulate and never heard anybody else articulate. And when you hear them, you're like, yes, that's it. Right. So he's talking about how optimism, like seeing the world as like fully good, has never felt right, and seeing the world as fully bad and hopeless has never felt right. And he talks about it as more of like a cosmic patriotism, right? So he says the flag of this world, like we don't have a choice about what world we were given. We were given this world. So like any good patriot, we should love this world without reason because it's ours, because we're already here, right? Like any fundamental rejection of the world that you live in cuts against yourself. And it cuts the branch off that you're already sitting on. So like, I'm here, I'm going to love it. But then it's also like, you need to not be overly rosy about it. You need to be able to have your eyes open and understand that I love this world. I want the best for it. Like I want to see it flourish. I'm not going to hold on to this rosy idea that everything is as it should be. I want to go after the redemption of this thing. Because I love it, because I love this life that I've been given, because I love this world that God created, because I love like the soul that God has given me, and I want to do something with it. Mm-hmm. I want the adventure. Any other form of life has never made any damn sense to me. I don't understand why anybody else. I mean, I get it. I was blessed with a very golden childhood with very loving parents that gave me my worldview, and I would, I have the DNA jackpot that I have, whatever. Like seeing the world any other way to me has never made sense for me. Mm-hmm. I've come across people who their experiences with the world, I'm like, I can see why you would be so, hurt and pessimistic. But inside of your heart, I think inside of everybody's heart, whether you're like really, really in a dark place, or whether you're still holding on to some naive view of everybody is good and everything is going to be fine. I think everybody can understand when you hear it that we live in enemy occupied territory. We live in a world where things are not as they should be. It's a good world gone wrong, and it doesn't have to stay this way. Yeah. It can be made better. The invitation of the Christian faith is to bring heaven to earth and to see the redemption of the things around us and the people around us. And the adventure of your life is an invitation to participate in that story.
Dude, yeah, I think that's so good. Chesterton's idea of loving things first so they become lovely is huge, especially when you conceptualize, like, him using the cosmic patriotism is a beautiful analogy, where ideas of patriotism nowadays, I've been reading a lot of Solzhenitsyn and his anti-globalist ideas, and his idea of loving place, and place is a good thing to love, and what makes up a place, and all the stuff that goes into culture. But one of the things that's fascinating is, like, most of us feel a bit of the unearthing and the disconnection from our current place, our current relationships, our current churches, our current careers, all of that stuff. And we think that the hatred and the bitterness and the resentment and being bothered by it and then searching for answers is somehow going to find it. Aislinn was saying this to me the other day. She said to me, like, the curse of her 20s, she was saying, is like, I thought I just needed to go to another place and do another thing, but everywhere I go, there I am. And so this idea of loving something,
dude, our millennial answer is to bolt. Our millennial answer is to run away and find something new. And maybe that's not just millennial, like maybe that's just where we are in society right now. But the stories that I love, dude, any good story is about reform. It's about, like, take the thing and make it better. Yeah. There's a tyrant on the throne. Freaking kill him, overthrow the government, and, like, supplant it with something that's righteous. Like, that's the story. Like, that's the story. That is the story. It's what Jesus did. It's like the whole story of the Bible is this, like, reform redemption story where it's like, okay, we started perfection, fall. What's the rest of the story? It's the story of it's a rescue mission. It is the hero's journey. That's what it is. So
yes,
I think if you take anything away from this conversation, what I hope you take away from it is that you have an invitation to step into an adventure. You have the invitation to have a life that is meaningful, that is fulfilling, that has a positive impact on the people around you, and that is fun, that, like, is worth all of the crap that you're going to have to shoulder and stomach in your life.
Yes.
That's number one. Number two is you have a role to play in the story of redemption. And if there's something in your life, whether it is a church or a business or a city or a family or a marriage that isn't working, I'm not saying stay there because I don't know the situation, but you have that option to stay and to reform and to seek the flourishing of that place that you are. And you can run away forever and you're always going to find something wrong. Your life will not feel meaningful to you, and it won't have a positive impact on anybody else until you start planting some roots and start shouldering some responsibility and start saying, I'm going to take this on and try to reform this story. Try to play a role of redemption here.
Yes. So good. I was going to say, like, hey, make a plug for Hero Journey, but that was definitely it. So what you should do is, if that has spoken to you, you should check out Ian's page. You go to his page. I'll post a link with this, and I'll post a link in my stories and stuff and whatever we post online. But Hero Journey,
I will say the invitation is, like, it is a 12-month journey. It's a lot of work. It's designed to fit into a busy life because I'm busy. I'm running a couple businesses. I've got 3 boys. I've got a house that's currently falling apart in a lot of ways. So anyways, I'm like, I want it to fit inside of a busy life, but I want it to give you your time back on the things that matters. I want it to give you clarity. So it's a 12-month journey with a bunch of guys that are on the mission with you. You're going to come away with some lifelong friendships, but you're also going to come away with some massive transformation in your life. Like the goal is, at the end, you are more fulfilled as an individual. Your faith is stronger. Your marriage is stronger. You're a better leader. You're a better dad. and you have a clear vision on what your life is supposed to be about and how to be yourself in your own life.
Yeah. And I can't recommend it enough. I think the one thing I will say to help nail it down is I have done and seen and participated in a lot of like Christian masculinity things. Hero Journey was unique. Like there isn't anything like it. I don't think there will be anything like it for a long time unless people are going to copy you. And if they do,
I hope they do. I really hope they do.
And that's the thing. And if they do, it's just proof that you have hit something that matters. And
nothing here is mine, right? Like this is just an invitation to like, let's take all the wisdom that we can, all the tools that we can, all the weapons that we can. Let's gather our forces and let's go do this thing.
Yeah, like to say something super
I put this
cringe
together in a way that like makes sense to me. But dude, I hope other people do this for sure.
Yeah, of course. Like, and because we literally are all in this together. And like, I know that's so cringy, but as Christians, like to bring heaven to earth, to build the kingdom and to play our part. Paul says it best. There's like such a humility. It's like where some people are doing this from selfish ambition, but like, I don't care. The kingdom is going forward. And that's like, so that is enormous. So I can't recommend Hero Journey enough. It was great when I did it. I can only imagine how much better it's going to be with a few extra years of thought and discipline and focus given to it. Ian, this is a great conversation. I mean, that hour and a half blew by. We'll have to do another one soon.
Definitely.
And we'll be able to chat about a bunch of stuff. Yeah, we'll talk about so much stuff, dude. Is there anything else you want to let the folks know that you're up to or where they can check you out?
No, yeah, check out herojourney.io. I've got a Hero Journey YouTube going. I'm trying to start having more conversations. I'm trying to figure out how to make this not just a small thing that I'm doing with a small group of guys. I'm on a journey of my own journey to try to figure out how to involve more guys into this conversation and invite more people into this lifestyle. I'm a guy talking to other guys. I'm not a girl. I don't know how to speak specifically to women. There's a lot of stuff that I talk about that is universally applicable. I hope that at some point this, spreads to a female audience as well. But yeah, I would just say, I want to hear your stories. I just want to invite guys to join a movement of guys that are trying to figure this out together and reclaim a life of positive impact and adventure. I don't want this to be about me. I want this to be a movement of guys. So yeah, find me on Instagram, find me on YouTube, chat me up. I'd love to hear your stories. And yeah.
Sweet.
Josh,
dude,
thanks
awesome.
for having me.
Yeah, honestly, such a pleasure, man. It's always so fun to chat. Guys, thanks for tuning in. Much love.